Looking at the financial difficulties in the 1920s and the 1930s in Europe from today's perspective, I find it easy to come to the conclusion that it occurred as a result of a lack of financial knowledge by the general public. At that time, there were a number of new financial occurrences happening worldwide, and many people were unsure of how to handle them.
I find it interesting that you say that, because in my opinion, the problems came from German economic collapse and dependence in the years following World War I. The expectations of the German government to pay off such colossal loans in such a short period of time were an illusory prospect. If Europe had worked together in the years after World War I, Germany might not have suffered so greatly from hyperinflation, and the countries could have helped each other get their feet back on the ground. I also don't think it's fair to blame ordinary citizens for the problems which occurred. I know that I wouldn't want to take responsibility for the decisions that my government made or failed to make. But what would you say were the financial occurrences that were taking place in the late 1920s, which maybe led these citizens to make tough financial decisions that caused the economic collapse?
In the 1920s, there was a large outbreaks in banks lending out loans. Also, there were financial layaway and credit plans for purchasing items. Because many people were not knowledgeable on how to manage repaying these amounts that they owed, both they and the banks then fell into debt.
It's true that the lack of financial understanding had an impact on banks falling into debt, but if Europe hadn't have been so dependent on America for financial support, that wouldn't have hit them so hard. Europe, Germany especially, went into panic mode, depending way too much on America, focusing way too much on something that was going on across an ocean, and not enough on the issues at hand, the issues in front of them, the economy. Europe dragged themselves into the crises that went on in the late 1920s. Europe brought itself into the stock market crash of 1929. It all connects.
Yes, while that might be true, I also have to look at what the debts ended up bringing about for various nations. Because of the lack of financial knowledge by the general public, many people were not saving money and were blindly investing in stocks that they didn't understand. This was dangerous because when the stock market crashed in 1929, these people lost all of their money. And then, because they had no savings, they were unable to pay off their loans that they owed to the banks, and they fell into debt. Then, because of the lack of regulations on banks, there was no safety net, and the banks fell into debt as well. Because European nations at the time were completely reliant upon the United States for their economic stability, this also then caused their economies to plummet as well, creating a worldwide economic crisis.
Okay, I agree that Germany isn't entirely to blame for the occurrences of the late 1920s, but they didn't exactly help find a solution either. I just don't think we can blame the crisis on unsuspecting citizens who didn't know enough about the handling of money to expect anything bad to happen. I know the Germans didn't exactly ask for their large role in the paying back of the war, but they had a major hand in dragging the economy down. Someone has to be held accountable, and my radar points to the Germans.
Overall, I do see some validity to your opinion that Germany's financial collapse played a large role in the worldwide economic crisis that occurred in the 1930s. However, I personally believe that if the public was educated on finances at the time and there were stricter regulations on banks, then the stock market crash would not have caused such a drastic recession, and Germany would have had the time and the resources to recover completely. And for these reasons, I feel that the lack of financial knowledge is what ultimately caused such a huge economic crisis.
I respect your opinions, and you made a great argument. All I have to say is hindsight is 20/20. So if this happens again, if our economy goes down again, I'm sure we'll be able to fix it. Maybe.